Good evening. I'm very happy to be here this evening. It was pointed out to me it was 11 years ago the last time I was here, and I hope that this is. Can you hear all right? I hope that this is not the last poetry reading that takes place in this space. When Jackson introduced me, I remember the last time I read here, he said, what attracted me to Dan Gerber's poetry was the cover of his book. He said, I bought it because I liked the Winslow Homer painting on it. He said some nice things after that too, but actually it was the cover that sold the book. I want to read something that I copied out of a New Yorker about 2 years ago that just struck me as good.
You're not on the mic.
Pardon?
Slightly over to the mic.
Oh, okay.
Perfect.
All right. It's by the poet and critic Dan Chiasson. He said, the medium of poetry isn't language, really. It's human loneliness. A loneliness that poets, having received it themselves from other poets, transfer it to their readers. Like bees in a honeycomb, writers and readers experience isolation and solitude communally and collaboratively. This is what Harold Bloom speaks of when he says that poets create an otherness such that loneliness is created and alleviated at once. Writing a poem, you create that vivid otherness. Reading one, you recreate it in your own person. These two lonely souls, writer and reader, are bound to one another. They can be miles or centuries apart. I have said before that my work would be nothing. It simply wouldn't exist without all the teachers that came before me. And I think of it really as picking up a fire that they lit and trying to carry it a little further and hope that maybe that continues. A few words. If there are words that would rescue the earth from other words that would destroy her, I want to speak them as purely as the grass turns green on the heels of a late winter storm. I don't know what they would be, or even if such words could exist. The earth herself remains silent in her steady course past the sun. So I listen and watch, and even guess sometimes, writing them down, hoping someone may find and refine them, urging her on through her seasons. Out walking in early November. Only late sunlight spattered under the oaks, and now a pair of red tails so effortlessly over the next range of hills, I wonder if they are taking it all in up there as I imagine, and if they need me to make it beautiful. The year I was 12 years old was a very important year in my life. It was one of the unhappiest years of my life, but also one of the most important. I was sent away to a school where I was 2 years younger than everybody else, and I was, as Jim Harrison would say, a little turd of misery. That's what his father used to call him. It had gotten to be late April. I hadn't seen my mother since Christmas. She was coming for a visit, and I had been marking the weeks and the days off on the calendar of her visit. And the morning of her visit, the dorm master came to my room and handed me an envelope with a note in it from her saying she wouldn't be coming. She had been called to the sickbed of a friend. And of course, I was crushed. But there was also a $20 bill in the envelope. And I had never had a $20 bill before. And all I could think of that I wanted was to be somewhere else. So I walked out on the street and I hailed a taxi. And I asked the taxi driver to take me to the river, somewhere where I could rent a boat. This was in St. Louis, Missouri. So he took me to a boat livery on the Mississippi, where I rented a green rowboat from a guy named Fred. For some reason, I remember his name was Fred, and I gave him my Bulova watch for security, and I bought a ham and cheese sandwich, and I rowed out to an island in the middle of the river and spent the day alone out there, and it was one of the best days of my life. And I had enough money to get back to school that night, and of course I was in deep doo-doo, and I was locked up for the rest of the school year, but I didn't care. I had had the day I fled my 12-year-old life. A river broadly flowing, crossed to an island in a rented boat, green oars, green boat, green kingdom where I found for that one day and years beyond another boy who could be me. He had an easier way about him, not smarting from the sting of school, not lonely though he lived alone, not pining for his mother far away. He rustled in the trees all afternoon and purled in the current as it hugged the island and moved on. His spirits were snakes and birds and frogs. His voice was in the breeze. He told me I could come again, that he'd be there or anywhere if I would be there too, if I would just remember him. The river, the boat, the bees, and how the sunlight dazzled back the water through the trees. That year when I was 12, I read a poem in one of my textbooks. It was the first time it happened, and it completely took me out of that miserable little boy that I was at that time. It made the hair stand up on the back of my neck and completely took me to a different world, and that was my first discovery of the power. Okay, that was my first discovery of the power of a poem. There was another little poem that became very important to me by Juan Ramon Jimenez. And it goes like this. I am not I. I am this one walking beside me whom I do not see. The one who listens quietly when I speak. The one who forgives gently when I hate. The one who takes a walk when I'm indoors. The one who will remain standing when I die. And that other one is always there with me when I remember that. And it makes the difference between loneliness and solitude. To God himself in the passing hours. Through the boy who is me at the moment, quite out of his mind, wed to his shadow on the grass as he twirls to keep it twirling, and the clatter of the mower whirling through a still spring morning, the bleating of the grass, the bleating of the stems that cling to the blades, a kind of preaching we seldom hear anymore. I bow to the life being lived in this finch, and to the one I found rock still below the window on my terrace this morning, and to the pale moon now, askew in the sky. I can't imagine it further adrift. Rilke wrote a wonderful little poem that captures for me, in my experience, the way a poem comes into being. He said, "The space the birds go hurtling through is not the form-intensifying space you love. Out there in the open, you lose yourself and disappear without returning. Space reaches out from us, translating things. To know the being of a tree, project your inner space around it. Surround it with awareness. It will not be confined. Only its reconfiguration within your emptied mind can make it fully tree." This poem is called A Tree on the Prairie in mid-October, and lived in Idaho for a number of years, kind of on the Idaho-Wyoming border. And this poem came the same year that I met the woman who is now my wife. So I think this is a love poem. A tree on the prairie in mid-October. Something about the single aspen I photographed a dozen times this fall, hidden from view in sage and grass on the far slope of the hill I can see from my bedroom window. Of those who walked with me, no one took notice. I don't know why I am drawn to this gnome-like tree, the way its heart-shaped leaves enliven the sun, perhaps, a little more gold each day. Something not only of itself comes out of the tree when I see it, something not me that I am. Our lives are short in the middle and long at both ends. How strange to give up being alone. One day we drove 8 miles south of where we lived to a little town called Driggs, and we had a pizza for lunch, and we were sitting outside the pizza place finishing our pizza, and we noticed a pickup truck pull up to the curb on the main street of the town, and people started to gather around the pickup. So after we finished our pizza, we walked across the street to see what was attracting all the attention. The bear on Main Street. What made the man kill this bear? His truck across which the bear's body lies tells me it wasn't to feed his family or because his children were cold. The bear has beautiful black feet, delicate, almost like the soles of patent leather slippers, and the wind riffles the surface of its fur like the sheen of water in an autumn sun. The bear looks as if it might only be sleeping, but its tongue lags from its mouth, and the man has wrapped it with stout twine and bound it to the bed of his truck, as if he were afraid it might speak. 3 teenage boys pull their pickup to the curb. One of the boys guesses what the bear must weigh. Another wants to know how many shots it took. And the third boy climbs down. He strokes its nose and forehead. He traces the bear's no longer living skull with the living bones of his fingers and wonders by what impossible road he will come to his father's country. On my 70th birthday, I read that tens of thousands of people have drowned in Bangladesh, and 1 million more may die from isolation, hunger, cholera, and its sisters, thirst and loneliness. This morning in our lime tree, I noticed a bee dusting a single new bud, just now beginning to bloom, while all the others were sagging with heavy green fruit. I read that in Moscow, every man, woman, child, and dog is inhaling 8 packs of cigarettes a day, or its equivalent in smoke from the fires raging over the steppes. I saw the god of storms take the shape of a tree, bowing to the desert with her back to the sea. I saw on television a woman in Iran buried up to her breasts, then wrapped in light gauze to protect the spectators. Weeping in terror and pleading for her life, while someone at the edge of the circle of men dressed in black picked up the first baseball-sized rock from the first hayrick-sized pile to hurl at her eyes, nose, mouth, ears, throat, breasts, and shoulders. How big is my heart, I wonder? How will it encompass these men dressed in black? Now the fog drifts in over the passes, screening the peaks into halftones, and then into no tones at all. These goats with names, with eyes that make you wonder, these goats who will be slaughtered today. Why these goats? There are reasons, but they are human reasons. I listened while my friend spoke through his grief for his son, shot to death in the pizza shop he managed in Nashville after emptying the safe for a desperate young man with a gun, who my friend told me he'd forgiven. Spoke of consolation through his tears. The spirit of his son still with him, he said. The spirit of his son still with him. Oak tree, joy of my eye that reaches in so many directions, are the birds that fly from your branches any closer to heaven? The moon, shimmering on the surface of the pond, its rippling reflected in your eyes, of which you are no more aware than the wind just passing through this oak, of the acorns still bobbing. The mountains resolute now in fading light. With her nose deep in the late summer grass, my dog calls up a new story. That poem was actually written just before my 70th birthday, because my actual 70th birthday I spent in the hospital with a kidney stone. Everybody told me I had a great birthday party and they just wished I could have been there. Yeah. It occurred to me that if we could see the universe we live in from the viewpoint of the atoms of which it's comprised, there would be no possible way where I could tell where I left off and you began. It's what Einstein called the optical delusion of the universe, the optical delusion that we exist as separate beings. Often I imagine the earth through the eyes of the atoms we're made of. Atoms, peculiar atoms everywhere. No me, no you, no opinions, no beginning, no middle, no end. Soaring together like those ancient Chinese birds, hatched miraculously with only one wing, helping each other fly home. After the rain. I'm dedicating this to a poet named Paul Ferracano because he always asked me to read this poem. And so, Paul, this is for you. He's not here tonight, but after the rain, I spot a young barn owl standing by the road, peering at his own reflection in a puddle, or so it seems, when I pull off on the shoulder to see if I can help. Dazed, probably struck by a car, though not visibly wounded, he looks up across the puddle where I'm standing to ask about this wondrous underground bird he is seeing, as if to ask if I see it too. I'm going to read a few new poems. This one came just after my selected poems were published. It's called Collected Works. As if he held another body of himself in his hands and turned it over and looked at it and wondered where to set it down. What I remember of World War II. I was born the day before the first air raid on Britain, and of course remember nothing of that. But I remember everything that was spoken about the war and the way people looked when they spoke about it. I remember the German prisoner of war camp in our little town only a few blocks from our house. Remember the black and white newsreel film of the Nazi Stuka dive bombers screaming through sirens fixed to their wings to make their deadly terror even more terrible to those about to die and to those who remembered the terrified dying, and the scars, if only in the memories of those telling it, and the names from the radio, and the ink-soaked names on the front pages of the newspapers I picked up from the sidewalk. Al-Alamein, Corregidor, Saipan, Tarawa, Bastogne, Buchenwald, Guadalcanal, Dresden, Iwo Jima, The Bulge, Hiroshima, Dunkirk. Remember the young men in khaki who came to our house to see my sister, the off-duty guards from the prison camp who came to drink and play pinochle with my mother and Martha, my nanny, my father away in Washington for the war, the jokes and laughter through the haze of camels and lucky strikes, and the blue stars in the windows of families with fathers, husbands, and sons away in the war, and two of those stars turning gold for Mrs. Jackson across the street, whose husband's destroyer went down in the Coral Sea, and for Mrs. Keller, catty-corner to our house, whose son Jack burned up in the sky over Dresden. The foxholes I dug in the sand at our cottage where I waited for the Jap ships to loom up on the far Lake Michigan horizon. Remember the piercing blue of the morning glories against the whitewashed fence out our kitchen door, where I stood when I heard on the radio of a great bomb dropped on Japan. And a few days later, when my mother gave me the key to open a neighbor's cottage for two men delivering a mattress, and how the one walking backwards as he carried the front end of it said, "Hey kid, did you hear? The war's over." And I ran back up the long drive, the road so much longer and the gravel deeper, running home to tell my mom that now everything would be all right forever. This one kind of follows, it's a childhood memory, follows a year later. It's called Radio, 1946. Like windows flashing from a passing train, the gibbon moon now and now and now through the peaks of roadside hemlock and pine made him almost forget he was there, alone in the cavernous back seat of the Ford convertible, chasing its headlights through a warm summer night. Just ahead, in the light from the dash, there was music. There were the silhouettes of a man and a woman who may also have forgotten he was there behind them, as if in the steady thump of tires over tar strips, and the glissading trombone and clarinet from the radio. He was only the feeling between them in that moment, pressed together behind the wheel, the rhythm of the moonlight, of the road, and the pulse of the music through the trees, alone in that speeding island of peace, held together alone, speeding through the still, still summer night. Other. When I had yet to learn the nature of words, I had no sense the trees and animals I walked among were something I was not. Only when I saw the swallow fly into the glass of the window I was watching through and picked it up and felt its life struggle to get back inside as its eyes closed and its head shook, and my hand felt its body cool and become a thing somewhere beyond a glass that wouldn't let me through. I feel very badly for Elise that your dog died in March. And we're sad at our house. We lost a dog a couple of weeks ago. And we had a number of literary dogs. We had Willa for Willa Cather, and Udi, who was named after Eudora Welty, and Rainey, who was named after Rainer Maria Rilke. This was Willa. She was only 8 years old. And I've been through this a few dozen times, but it never hit me this hard. And I don't know if it was because she was so young or I was so old. This poem was written a few years ago. It's called Groundhog Day. And Emmylou Harris wrote to me that she uses this poem when she gives a fundraiser concert for animal shelters. Groundhog Day. I hear a muffled yelp from the hallway. Our old dog Eudora has made a wrong move and tweaked the crumbling discs in her spine. Otherwise, she's happy, I think. She pants and thumps her indefatigable tail against my leg when we pause on our gentle walk over the hills, and still defers to her nose above all other callings. I don't think she knows she will die. I don't think she suffers concern over what she may have to endure tomorrow or the day after, or that a month from now she may lose me or the woman we live with, who reads the look in her eyes and speaks for her in a language only the tone of which she understands. But it's enough that she smells coyotes and truck tires and the soon-to-be dead equally without regret, like this curly brown feather just fallen from a bird we didn't see. Willa had a sarcoma, a tumor on her heart, and the day after we lost her, I got up, and the first thing I do every morning is get up, go in the bathroom, put my jeans and boots on to take the dogs out, and Willa would always go in there with me. And while I was doing my stretches, she'd get her tummy rub. And the morning after her death, I walked in there and in that empty room, and I just broke down. And I'm sure they could hear me in the bedroom. The next morning, our 12-year-old, Rainey, I got up, went to the door. She was at the door. She pushed her way into the bathroom and almost said, "I got you covered, Dad." A few years ago, we lost, we had an orphan filly. We had a filly whose mother rejected her, and we had to separate them to protect the filly. So every 4 hours, around the clock for almost 9 months, Debbie got up to feed that filly 3 liters of goat's milk. Only this morning, in 100 trillion years, an actual number though we can't begin to grasp it, the last traces of our universe will be not even a memory, with no memory to lament it. The last dust of the last star will not drift in the great nothing out of which everything we love or imagine eventually comes. Yet every day, every 4 hours, around the clock, Debbie prepares her goat's milk mix for the orphaned filly, who sucks down all 3 liters of it, gratefully it seems, as if it matters more than anything in the universe. And it does at this moment, while the sun is still 4 hours from rising on the only day that matters. So on August 20th, 1962, I took my vows to poetry. I was out of college, working at a job that was just smothering my soul. And it was a cold August afternoon. And I walked out of the house I was living in down this abandoned road, and I sat on the trunk of a tree that had fallen off the road, or across the road. And I made a vow to myself that whatever else I did in my life and whatever else I had to do, my attention was going to be focused on the life within me and around me and the place where those two came together in words. And I remember the date because I wrote a poem called The 20th of August. It was a horrible poem, but the title fixed the date. So then, 50 years later, I continue composing my love letter. This is called Once Again in August. I continue composing my love letter to the earth in all her beauty and affliction, hoping I might love her even a little bit more. I write down the words and blow on the paper till the black ink stops shining and the author is all but forgotten, till the tree outside the window is the live oak on the hillside and me, till her leaves are the stars of her own particular galaxy and mine, till the blades of grass surrounding her are the evidence of her stubborn persistence and mine, till the all-enveloping scrim of the sky is her fragile blue cloak and mine, till in another 5 billion years she's blown into a cloud of hydrogen dust, food for a future Earth, and I still haven't finished her song. I'm going to end with two very short poems. This first one is paying homage to one of our smallest and most intimate companions, frequently given poems of praise. To a tick. I feel your devotion, though it doesn't feel quite like love. I've literally got you who dropped in uninvited under my skin, as the old song goes. You of whom I was even unaware, till I became inflamed with your presence, and you engorged with mine. What a perfect couple we are, now living off the same blood. And one little poem asking a question. This poem is in my new book, Particles, but few people see it because it's printed on the inside of the back cover. And it's called Ever. I wonder if I'll ever get beyond the Milky Way by dying. I wonder if atoms of my living body now will ever get that far. I wonder what I mean by I. Thank you.